We are good and ready to go, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this June 3rd, 2020 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Welcome to my board colleagues and advisors, staff, visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And for our visitors and those listening online, our committee meetings and reports will span 2 days. Tomorrow's meeting will include voting on any items needing action. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. George Floyd. We begin this meeting saying his name. For anything less, further supports the comfortable silence which surrounds and upholds the systemic practices which continue to plague our nation and state and result in the physical and mental deaths that many Black and brown citizens experience every day. The pandemic of the past 2 months and the events of the past week have revealed in undeniable clarity the vast inequities that are embedded in our society and the underlying systemic racism that sustains them. Because our education system reflects our society, our schools are not immune from these societal imperfections, which diminish the education of every child in our state. Colleagues and I have seen firsthand their impact on our students and have felt the anger and frustrations that so many of our fellow citizens feel. Moreover, some of us have personally experienced and lived with these inequities and racism. As a white man, as much as I try to understand what others are feeling, I know that I cannot fully appreciate and understand what people of color experience and the impacts of discriminatory behavior that others must live with every day. But what I can do with my colleagues and education leaders across our state is confront head-on the inequities and racism in our society and in our education system. Progress removing inequities and racism requires change, and change requires learning, and we are in great need of all three: urgent progress, systemic change, deeper understanding, through learning, particularly with those who have different life experiences. Many education leaders across our state are already engaged in this work, and we join hands with them. Moreover, we invite leaders at all levels in our state, in all parts of our state, who have any role in the education of our children to join us. As a nation and state, we have made progress. However, progress we all need will only occur when we refuse to hide the historical truths that divide and separate us, no matter how uncomfortable we may feel. President Kennedy once reminded us that, quote, "Our privileges can be no greater than our obligations. Protection of our rights can endure no longer than the performance of our responsibilities," end quote. The recent events reinforce that our silence as a nation and as individual citizens causes us to continue to repeat the same injustices that have plagued us throughout our history, injustices that absolutely conflict with our founding principle, that all are created equal. We have a great obligation, even greater responsibility, to eliminate these pervasive injustices against the historically marginalized groups in our nation and to become a nation worthy to be called the land of the free and the home of the brave. Throughout this public health crisis, we've all felt the separation, isolation, and utter loneliness that this pandemic has caused. Feeling of separation that crosses geographic, social, economic, religious, and all other boundaries that seem to divide us. Yet we share that yearning to reconnect anew with friends and loved ones, to remove the barriers and limits that divide us physically, emotionally, spiritually. In the same way, these inequities and racism that divide us are a social pandemic that we have suffered under for far too long. Like COVID-19, which is seemingly invisible, which can be carried, transmitted, and received unknowingly, inequities and racism are in the air we breathe. And like COVID-19, we must first mitigate its spread and ultimately vaccinate ourselves and remove it from our society. This will take more than being empathetic to those who suffer under these inequities and racism. It will take intentional, determined, relentless commitment and work from all, especially those of us who are white and in positions of power and leadership, to end this social pandemic. Our children's education, their future, and our future with them depends on it. While we grieve as a nation, state, and society, let us reflect on how each of us can maximize every opportunity we face to make a change for the least of us, for the benefit of all of us. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. challenged us that, quote, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Let us commit to treating others as we would want to be treated, even if that requires the hard work of hard and at times unpopular decisions in order to create a better North Carolina for all. We can truly overcome and achieve when peace is not absent from justice. So I'd like to pause and provide an opportunity for any of my colleagues to share their thoughts.
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Ford.
Yes, Mr. Ford.
I just want to express my appreciation for you taking a moment to lift up those names and address this issue head on. And as a point of personal privilege, I would just like to state for the record, unequivocally and unapologetically, that Black life and furthermore Black lives matter. This statement should be not even remotely controversial or provocative. And so to hear you affirm the humanity of those individuals does my heart well, but also furthermore is necessary. I'd also like to reject and rebuke any implication to the contrary or any engagement in false choice, fallacies, or deflections. Our lives should matter, whether we're jogging through a neighborhood, whether we're sound asleep in the comfort of our homes. It should matter whether we're bird watching in a park. They should matter, especially when they're pressed face down on the pavement with the full weight of an officer kneeling on our necks. And they should matter in our schools. They should matter to male or female, trans or binary, gay or straight. All Black lives should matter. And we have to be willing to say that, more importantly, to demonstrate that as members of the body, because the truth is, as you've already laid out, that's never been the case in this country, my country. I'm not personally ever an advocate of teachers going about their business in a way that is dislocated or detached from the social and political reality. And so I don't want us to do that. I want us to situate our work and understand that we have an obligation, that we are duty bound, not to personally absolve ourselves of allegations of racism, but to deliberately be anti-racist in our approach to our work, and that is to cleanse this institution of every vestige of white supremacy that exists. I want to take a moment to empathize with those who may be observing all the activities across the nation, who may be in shock, even put off by the destruction of property as part of some of the protests. I understand some of that recoiling. But speaking as a Black person, to a people who once themselves were considered property or three-fifths human, you have to understand how that prioritization sounds to us. Our work for constructing a better school system, a better state, country is just beginning. But we have to reconcile our foundational flaws before we can move forward. I know there are probably a lot of folks listening in, but there are even more people across the nation and across the world that are watching us right now. And I want to see if we are the nation we've been projecting ourselves to be. So I just want to use this moment to point to the clarion call to do right, to do good, and to be just in everything that we do. And so I appreciate you giving me the space this morning, and I hope that we can coalesce this moment more than just a flash in the pan, but into an entire orientation in the way that we do our work. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr.
Chairman.
Hall.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to thank my fellow colleague on the board for speaking from his heart and the words that I would have wanted to present also, but I thank him. I'm a person that walked in the 60s, 66, 67, 68, and 69. I never thought that this day would come back again, but it is here. And it's already been said, it has to be dealt with and dealt with finally, or it will not reappear. But I also wanted to say to you, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for your opening comments. Thank you for your sincereness. And I was wondering, would it be done? And you did, and I thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir, Mr. Keenan.
may I just have a brief word? Myself, I applaud you. I must be honest with you, I am very emotional this morning, very sensitive to your conversation, your statement. I'm very sensitive to what's happening in our country. I'll only say that to deal with the issue of racism, as you talked about and others talked about, we must find a way to be together. To make change takes nerves, takes one who willing to stand for what's right. You have done that this morning. Everybody won't agree with right. That's always been the case. But I love you before today, but now I love you much more today than I did yesterday, because you have really affected my heart this morning in a good way. And I say that as Americans, as people, as God's people, we must do better. We can do better. We shall do better. But one race can't make it better. We all must get together, understand that we're all God's children, and we are to love one another. If we do that, that's the only way that we can be a better nation. And thank you again for your statement this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan.
Chairman Davis, this is Mariah Morris.
Yes, Ms. Morris.
I would like to say that as a North Carolina teacher who is also a white female and represents approximately 80% of our teachers, even though our student population is far more diverse, I would like to stand proud and talk and recognize that Black lives do matter. They matter in our state, they matter in our nation, they matter in our schools. And I would like to encourage all of the teachers across North Carolina to stand with me and be an ally and recognize that the Black Lives Matter of our students, and we must work together to make sure that we are not promoting any form of institutional or personal racism in our classroom.
Thank you, Ms. Morris.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Chemnitz.
thank you. I can't really add to the words that I've heard from my colleagues, yet I feel compelled to add my voice to theirs. Since COVID arrived, most of us have been experiencing feelings of disconnection, powerlessness, and the inability to live the life we desire. During the past 10 days, that experience has helped me to empathize more deeply with the people across our country, our state, and our communities who live with those feelings every single day. As a board, we have the power to change the lives of the students who attend our public schools so that they will not have to lead lives of disconnection, powerlessness, and poverty. We took a huge step forward when we adopted our strategic plan and its focus on equity. We must keep pushing hard to turn that into meaningful change. This is urgent work, and our current circumstances only increase that urgency. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Matt Bristow-Smith. Whether we've been participating in social protests this week or we've been watching on television, it's not enough for us as educators to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. And anti-racism is more than just making posts or sending tweets, reading articles online, or having conversations on our couch at night or at our dinner tables with like-minded individuals or family members. Being anti-racist means that we stand up and we act up, not when we're called to, but when it's easy for us not to. Being anti-racist means it's translated in our actions. Being anti-racist is translated in how we treat other people. Our North Carolina public schools, my school that I lead, we are uniquely positioned to either perpetuate inequity and racism or to ameliorate and fix those systems that marginalize some children. While we've been looking this week at what's happening around the world, we must also look within, and we must also look at us. We got to hold a critical lens, Mr. Chair, not only to our society and to our schools, but to ourselves as individuals. This can't be a black movement. It's got to be a human movement, and we've all got to be in it. So I'll say George Floyd's name, but I'll also say
Take your time, Matt. Take your time. If you need, I can chime in, brother, until you get right.
hang on. Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I'll say Abdur's name, and Gerald's name, and Malachi's name, and Ja'Cory's name, and Tabari's name, and James's name. I'll say their name too, because I know they would say my name. And I'll fight for them too. Thank you for the moment.
Thank you. Wallace.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I share that emotion of my brother, Matt Freebird. We've been talking a lot over the past week. I had my breaking point last Friday. As you continue seeing the images that are being illustrated and portrayed on the TVs for right and wrong, but what's really more concerning is the comments via social media that's coming from people that we would call neighbors, and it hurts. I crisscrossed this state for the benefit and the upliftment of all children over the past 2 years. I never used that platform to address the current accepted status quo of this social pandemic. To remain silent now is an affront to the progress that has been made over the past several decades to fight what we see. I just want to hearken at what we always go to is Maslow's hierarchy of needs when it comes to addressing needs of children. But right now, what we're seeing on the street, these were children. These were children that actually made it through and now they're adults, and then have things snatched away from them or be incarcerated. Really, really hurts. I reference you to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the big building block at the bottom is physiological needs. And the end, I used to always tease with my audiences, I never understood why reproduction was on the end of that. It just seemed like a construct that was out of place. But when you leave this world or you're incarcerated, it takes away your ability to reproduce. You look at safety. You look at safety, which is the next building block: personal security, employment, resources, health, and property. We all know, sitting at this table a year ago, when we were on that college campus and we looked at that report of systemic inequities that's going on in the country, every last one of those constructs were represented. Love and belonging. All right, when you're demonized just because of the way you look and not via the content of your character, then there's a hard way to make sure that building block is adhered to and attained on your way up to becoming self-actualized. And then esteem, respect, self-esteem, status, strength, and that big word freedom at the end, you're demoralized just by simply how you talk to on a stop or whatsoever. You can't even stand on your own front porch without being accosted due to the saturations in our neighborhood of patrol. Last but not least, how can you ever become self-actualized without attaining all of those building blocks? And that's what you don't see. That's what I hope that people across the state hear these words, that you haven't been able to see it then. Just look at the literature. How can you become self-actualized when you cannot attain via yourself all of the building blocks that requires you to become self-actualized? And y'all, I'm gonna end with this. Yesterday, I have 2 assistant principals, and they are of the Caucasian descent. And I have an assistant principal that is African-American. And we go out and have lunch, and we go in and we sit together. Yesterday, we were out, and we caught the most meanest looks that we ever have seen when we went out, because they just misinterpreted the relationship of our outing. Well, as we were leaving, me and my African-American assistant principal noticed the looks. And when we got in the car, we started talking to it, and my assistant principal, Chris Thompson, says, "Mr. Wallace, I'm sorry, but I didn't even notice. But you know what? I know today now, but that's because of my privilege. I don't even know to look for it because I don't have to deal with it." And that was so profound, what she said. And that's what propelled me to say something today. I definitely thank all of my colleagues. Y'all don't understand this state board. This has been the best deal of the best 2 years of my life. Y'all don't understand. Y'all have good hearts. We're led by a good leader. Chairman Davis, you have no idea what those words meant this morning. You have no idea. Mr. Ford, Mariah, Matt, everybody that spoke, y'all have no idea. I love you all, and you're right. We have to come together to end this social pandemic. And I thank you for all that you said. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
This is Patrick Miller. May I speak?
Yes, Dr. Miller.
I won't take long. Just wanted to let everyone know that I agree with everything that has been said thus far this morning. I'm not sure that I can add anything to what's already been said, other than I stand ready with my colleagues to make the pre-K-12 educational system in this state become part of the solution. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Buxton.
First, thank you for your words and your leadership this morning. It matters a great deal. There's nothing that I will try to add that will meet the power of the comments we've heard today, but what I've heard this morning reminds me that we began our planning for this year at NCA&T State University, and we referenced the powerful example of 4 individuals who were big enough to meet the moment in 1960. And I think at that time we called ourselves to be big enough to meet the moment. I don't think we understood just how big the moment was going to become. And I would say to my fellow North Carolinians that we are fortunate to have a state board of education who looks after the students of this state, represented by individuals who are big enough to meet the moment. I've been reminded of that in the comments this morning. And Chairman Davis, in your admonition to listen and to learn and to deepen understanding and to change, what folks have said today takes us in that direction. And I'm proud and privileged to serve with the voices you have heard and the rest of my colleagues, because I do believe we stand on the shoulders of people from A&T who were big enough to meet that moment in 1960 and now have that challenge ourselves. But I am privileged, colleagues, and I appreciate the power of your testimony this morning.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I certainly won't take up a lot of time, only to say that I certainly have been very touched by all the sentiment and heartfelt comments for the last few minutes, and would certainly be remiss if I did not offer a couple of comments. One of the things that I've been reflecting on for the last few minutes is the fact that we have something very, I don't want to use the word symbolic because that minimizes the intent of my point. The work of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, which dates back to the late 80s, and one of the main products of that that group is the annual report on the achievement of American Indian students that are served by North Carolina. And that goes back to some recognition decades ago that something wasn't right in terms of fairness to American Indian students in our public schools. And out of that has come that symbol. I'm very proud of it. And that is just that certainly isn't the end of what needs to happen. It's just the beginning. And I'm very proud to be a part of a state board of education that continues to recognize that equity hasn't been achieved. Among our kids, our students of color, we have a ways to go in that regard. I'm rambling a little bit, and I'm going to ramble over to something that I just happened to be seated on my couch Sunday afternoon watching all the events unfold around the country. And it must have been meant to be, flipping through my remote, and there I came upon the History Channel and decided to pause for a few minutes. And what was being aired was a lost speech of John F. Kennedy shortly after, it might have been right after his inaugural speech, I'm not sure, it doesn't really matter. But it was so right for the times, and I thought, oh my goodness, wouldn't this be wonderful to capture this and get on top of a mountain and play it back? Because the statement was, and I'm going to do a pretty bad job paraphrasing it, but he was recognizing the inequality in America toward African Americans. The term people of color was not used in those days. And he was saying, we have made a start, and I suppose he was referencing the 1954 Brown versus Kansas ruling. We've made a start, we've begun, we need to keep beginning. We may never get there in terms of total equality and fairness and doing right by all people. But specifically, he was talking about people of color, African Americans, and I want to think somewhere in his mind, he was thinking of the Native Americans. He says, so we need to keep doing the work, but we may never get there. But that is not as important as continuing to do the work. I just wanted to share that thought with you because it was just appropriate for the moment that Sunday afternoon, and I just couldn't resist at this time sharing it with all of you. So I will go back to you, Chair Davis, on that point.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. My colleague spoken previously, you have so well articulated Many of my thoughts you have captured my heart. As most of you know, I am a follower of Christ. I found myself wondering how I could be the church when many of us can't gather to worship. And so today, because of my relationship with Christ, I wanted to share Philippians 2:1-4, which speaks to unity and unity through humility. And it says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love or any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, and of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each of us, colleagues, esteem others better than himself. Let each of us look out not only for our own interests, but also for the interest of others. What amazing guidance that gives us that we are his people, and we are of one body and one spirit through him. And so that is my guiding principle. My heart hurts for our nation. I want you to know that I'm committed to work in the best interest of every student, all students in this state. And for those of you that have suffered terribly because of my point of privilege, I admit that, and I commit to you today that my heart and my work will be with you. Thank you, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Ms. White.
Mr. Chair, may I speak?
Yes, sir. Vice Chair Duncan.
First of all, thank you for those very moving and important remarks. To my colleagues of color on this board and to the advisors on this board, I am sorry for the suffering that you and your brothers and your have endured over the lifetime of our country. I miss being with you, especially at a time like this, and very much look forward to embracing you literally when we are able to reunite in person, which I hope is soon. But for now, I embrace you figuratively at this juncture of American life that we hope becomes a pivotal moment for the good of the life of this nation. I love all of you on this board, the people who work with us in the department, and I thank each of you.
Thank you, sir. Well, to my colleagues and advisors, thank you for more than for your comments, but for being the Americans and the leaders that we so need. So at this time, we'll move forward with our work for our students, and I'll call on our Legislative Liaison and Community Affairs Director, Mr. McKinney, for his update. Mr. McKinney.
Good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, Lieutenant Governor Forrest, board members, advisors, my state board and DPI team members, colleagues across this state, and those listening within the Shire. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the legislative update and our collective work representing public schools. I am honored, but I'm also broken and affected. My soul aches because the spirit of the Shire, the spirit of many of my brothers and sisters, many of you on this call right now, is not well. And if I may, I need to briefly take my current role and I need to press pause and speak from the heart of my calling as an educator to my students. One of my favorite quotes is from the American philosophical icon, Dr. Cornel West, and it goes that education is soul crafting. And this quote has always emboldened me provided the needed force of action and the necessary direction to guide my service as a teacher and now as an educator diplomat, and also in these words I'm about to share, because education is soul crafting, and we are all always becoming. I will always be a teacher, and I need to say two things to my students today, and students everywhere. And the first is this: I do not know why the caged bird sings. In our philosophy class, we always engage in a unit about answering the question, what does it mean to be human? We use this thought experiment to develop lenses and perspectives that are different from our own worldview. Typically, we analyzed how humans are mortal, social, spiritual, moral, self-conscious and aware, and expressive. And we then use different elements of our human experience to further develop our individual lens, like poetry. And as we dug into how humans are expressive, we use poems like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, one of my favorite poems. But I am sorry, because as we read this poem in the poet's words, as the free bird, I dared to claim the sky. I tried to name the sky my own. And instead of listening to the caged bird singing, and this was racism, because I do not know why the caged bird sings. As Scott Woods, author and former president of Poetry Slam, says, yes, racism looks like hate, but hate is just one manifestation. Privilege is another, access is another, ignorance is another, apathy is another, and so on. And so while I agree with people who say no one is born racist, it remains a powerful system that we're immediately born into. It's like being born into air. You take it in as soon as you breathe. It's not a cold that you can get over. There is no anti-racist certification class. It's a set of socioeconomic traps and cultural values that are fired up every time we interact with the world. It is a thing you have to keep scooping out of the boat of life to keep from drowning in it. And I know it's hard work, but it's the price you pay for owning everything, end quote. This experience was privilege. And it is in these self-realizations that we begin dismantling and rebuilding our own individual lenses, where I do not want to own everything. I do not want to listen and learn. I want to listen and learn. I want to see each of you grow. And I want you to know your purpose and your meaning. And I want you to transcend the nihilistic threat and the hopelessness that plagues our society that you live in day to day. I want to hear your fearful trill of things unknown and longed for still. And if you will, all of this on this call, if you would pause for 30 seconds and reflect on what is on your hearts and listen. The second thing I want to say to my students is that race matters. And all that we do as educators and all that we do in our decision-making processes, particularly when it comes to the system of public education, we need to see this. We need to act on this. Several years ago, my philosophy students and I attended a speaking engagement by Dr. Cornell West at UNC Chapel Hill. And he discussed the interplay of individuality and unity. and how everyone in the audience needed to realize the struggle of combating systematic racism by actualizing as jazz freedom fighters. My students and I love this idea. It was an engaged commitment in thought and action, existential in its foundation, and as Dr. West put it, it was the interplay of individuality and unity, not one of uniformity and unanimity, imposed from above, but rather of conflict among diverse groupings that each dynamic consensus subject to question and criticism. As with a soloist in a jazz quartet or quintet or band, individuality is promoted in order to sustain and increase the creative tension with the group, a tension that yields higher levels of performance to achieve the aim of the collective project. And here, we recognize the beauty and the brilliance of difference, and rather than succumb to xenophobia and the fear of the other, we embrace each other, as we also acknowledge the historical struggle that has existed and has undermined this collective process and reject the structures of racism. So in conclusion, students, we stand as jazz freedom fighters. We are joined in the dynamic consensus of difference. We are listening to your trill and your song, and we are seeking to further understand. We are committed to the dismantling of structures that prohibit our constitutional duty to defend your access to a sound and basic education. And we are answering the call, remembering at its core that education is soul crafting. And until our soul is well, we will not rest, and we cannot return to the Shire. I leave you in this place with the words of Raleigh native Doug McMillan, President and CEO of the YMCA of the Triangle. Every opportunity we have to serve and interact with one another is an opportunity to be a part of the change for the better. And how we welcome those who are different from us, how we build common ground together, and how we stand for the rights of all individuals, regardless of race, gender, age, orientation, cultural background, ethnicity, and faith, ensures everyone has the ability to reach their full potential with dignity. Thank you. I would like to continue with the presentation by bringing everyone's attention to Governor Cooper's executive orders on COVID-19. This page reflects the executive orders 138 through 142 that have been put into action since our last board meeting. Again, we try to use this presentation as a library of resources for you to be able to access. Each of these are presented in both English and Spanish, and also accompany an FAQ. The next slide brings us all the way back to the beginning of the executive orders, and then also provides a DHHS graphic that helps to clarify what it means to move from the modified stay-at-home in phase 1 into our safer at home phase 2. The next slide then also presents phase 1, 2, and 3, which phase 3 follows in a 4 to 6 week period after phase 2, at this point designated for June 26th. The next slide again provides resources for the CARES Act, and also a link to the recommendations from OSBM in regards to that CARES Act. And this is a very convenient graphic provided by Division of School Business and NCDPI that shows the breakdown of both the state and the federal's CARES Act and those money allocated by this. And we will continue on to the North Carolina General Assembly update. Again, we are slowly moving, actually not slowly, we're actually pretty rapidly moving from a COVID response period within the General Assembly and the May 18th beginning of short session. I wanted to reiterate two of probably the most important bills at this time. House Bill 1043, which was the 2020 COVID-19 Recovery Act, You can see there in the graphic the appropriations and what they were designated for, as well in the next slide as the North Carolina joint priorities of both the State Board and DPI in those buckets that were reflected in the House Bill 1043. The sustaining child nutrition programs, supporting staff and resources for the physical and mental well-being of our students, continued services for our exceptional children, resources for digital and remote teaching and learning, and the Jumpstart Summer Bridge program. This slide provides another graphic that highlights the statute requirements for Senate Bill 704. And then I also wanted to provide just a very 30,000-foot view of some of the themes of the recent filed legislation, education-related bills, particularly those, again, that link back up to some of those priorities and those earlier themes that we've been focusing on, but also reflect a real connection to the strategic plan, as well as Leandro, social emotional and support, broadband internet connectivity, teacher recruitment and retention, driver's ed, and school construction bond. I wanted to just once again, before you can walk through the close to 50, 60 bills that I've listed on here in regards to education, use this lens of the legislative priorities for the North Carolina State Board within some of our upcoming funding requests. Obviously, I will not walk through every single one of these bills coming up, but I did want them to be in one position and space for you. So at your own time, if you're looking through and you would like more information on these bills, please follow up with me and I can provide any information and any next steps forward. So the next 5 or 6 slides reflect all legislation affecting K through 12 public education. And I did want to bring up one particular bill at the end of this set. Senate Bill 476, which is a school-based mental health bill, which has passed the House and Senate and is now being brought to the governor's desk. And overall, this will require the State Board of Education to create a school-based mental health policy and require K through 12 schools to adopt and implement this plan with the following requirements. If you remember, this is actually a bill that was resurrected from about a little less than a year ago and has now passed. I've included both the link to the bill itself and the bill summary on this page. Also, I wanted to provide this information for anyone that would like to follow both the House and the Senate. There is an audio and visual link to the chambers, and that way you can follow day by day. There's also links to the calendar so you can see what is transpiring. The rest of these are really reiterating some of the things that we've already gone over, so I'm going to move us through to the Shire part, please. I'll pause here. I'm sorry, pause here. And one slide before this, please. Thank you. So we are in the process right now, DPI, State Board, a group of local superintendents and a variety of stakeholders. These groups have been tasked with bringing recommendations to the State Board of Education for consideration and approval with reentry. This week is a very transformational week and will be foundational in moving forward. We have collapsed some of the original working groups that were previously sending information in, and these are those groups to the right here. And then these groups are continuing to be led by Dr. Bev Emery and Dr. Stegall. And this is a slide showing the school's reopening framework with those working groups feeding information up to the school's reopening task force and working in conjunction with the governor's office, the NCGA, the State Board of Education, and DHHS. The next part, and I just wanted to briefly walk through, in reiteration of many of your comments earlier, some resources that I would like to share, particularly this one talking about race, which is an online portal, one that is designed to help individuals, families, and communities talk about racism, racial identity, and the way that these forces shape our society. This is sponsored by the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and it really looks to be a really transformational resource. I also wanted to highlight an anti-racist reading list that comes out of the Chicago Public Library that was built by Ibram Kendi, who is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is also part of this list. Here's a link. You can also read the article from the Atlantic. Also wanted to briefly just highlight a few great things that have happened across not only our state, but also our country with the SpaceX launching NASA astronauts as we, again, build out the next generation of our rocket girls and boys and inspiring them to become interstellar educator diplomats. Wanted to celebrate those schools who received the 2020 Purple Star Awards for their commitment to supporting military-connected students, and thank Dr. Angie Mullinex for her work in this. And then continue to lift up resources for our educators, whether that be through the Friday Institute and remote learning for North Carolina educators, or UNC TV at home learning. Lastly, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our new Legislative Liaison, Carson. I'm going to allow her to briefly greet you all and introduce herself, and then I will follow up with questions.
Hey everyone, this is Carson Nelson. I'll be serving as the new Legislative Liaison for the department. I've been working under Wade for the last year as a legislative assistant, and I'm super excited to be in this role. I'm originally from Madison, Mississippi, and just a little about me, I studied public policy leadership and education at the University of Mississippi, and I recently graduated May 9th from the UNC School of Government with a Master of Public Administration. I have a few pictures on here just because if you really want to know me, you know that my dog, Barkley, in the top corner is really important to me, and he's also just so cute, so I couldn't help but include him. And then I have a picture of my sisters, and all three of my little sisters with me there, because they're really the reason that I have always wanted to work in education. My mom and stepdad and dad have always told me stories of playing teacher at as early as age 5, and that's only continued throughout the rest of my tenure, working in summer programs, starting summer learning programs and after-school programs, and creating curriculum to prevent summer learning loss. So I'm really excited to be able to provide my legislative experience and really get to work in an area that I'm passionate about as the new legislative liaison. So thank you all for allowing me to introduce myself. I have my contact information on this slide if anyone ever has any questions or just wants to reach out about any concerns they have. Thanks, Freebird.
Thank you, Carson, and welcome to the team, my friend. At this point, are there any questions in regards to this presentation or anything moving forward?
Freebird, this is Matt Smith.
Hello, Matt.
So, Freebird, many of us are aware that North Carolina is facing a $5 billion budget shortfall, and that 60% of our state's budget is tied to education. I know that your legislative update was not specific to budget, but with decreased tax revenues due to COVID's impact and also like the general reduced corporate tax rate in our state, our budget's going to be meticulously reviewed this year by our legislators, and some of the items that you shared are specific to the moment, but I think it's also important that I ask, or at least I want to take the point of privilege to ask for important consideration to projects that have been under construction for many years in our state, not specific to COVID, but these are ongoing priorities. Programs like our Teach NC program, which is not only a statewide jobs board, but it's also a one-stop entry point for anybody in North Carolina who wants to become an educator. And again, I know Freebird, your presentation is not specific to budget, but I know budget is on everyone's mind. The legislators will be consulting with you and with the board about how to reconcile available resources with what our priorities are. And so I know there's so many rocks that you're lifting right now, Freebird, but I just wanted to make a special case that while we're dealing with so much of the COVID impact and all the legislative implications for that, and we're going to the budget with a scalpel to try to somehow reconcile our $5 billion shortfall, I want to make sure that programs like Teach NC don't get lost in the mix. And I just wanted to make sure that I said that openly.
No, I really appreciate that. And if you refer back to the themes for the 2020 NCGA short session, you will see that teacher recruitment and retention is definitely one of the themes of those. There are multiple bills that speak to teaching fellows, new teacher support program, master's pay, professional development, as well as Teach NC specifically. The board right now is preparing the budget and reconciling that. And so I know that that is one of the strategic plans, priorities, and hopefully we will be able to speak at length on that with our legislators. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Chair Davis, this is Olivia. I have a quick question to Freebird.
Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Dr. Achenbach.
Thank you so much, Freebird, for the very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. Just for a moment, if you would go back to the school mental health policy and add a bit of detail to that. Is this something that the state board is going to have to frame for LEAs, or what might be the development process of that?
That's a great question. And if you go back to that particular slide, so what that will include is there will be a plan to include mental health training programs and specifically a suicide risk referral protocol. So part of the mental health training program will include youth mental health, suicide prevention, substance abuse, and then there will also be trainings that will be required. So what we, as a board, beginning August 1st, 2025, every 5 years, DPI will review the minimum requirements for these programs. The board will, in conjunction with DPI and their staff, will create that school-based mental health policy. And then by September 15th of each year, the K-12 schools will report to DPI about their content, and then we will report to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, as well as the Oversight Committee on Health and Human Services.
Okay, thank you very much. That's
Yes,
good.
ma'am.
Now I see the frame. It's very detailed. Thank you. I'll read it.
Yes, ma'am.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Mr. McKinney? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. McKinney, for that report, for your good work representing us with the legislature and in our communities. And also, thanks to our partners in the General Assembly for their support for our students through the previous session and the current session that's ongoing.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Board members, yes, sir. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it, ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. And if not, I request a motion for approval of the June 3 and 4, 2020 agenda.
Mr. Chair, this is Mrs. White. I move approval of the agenda.
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Olivia Oxendine offers a second.
Second by Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall? Mr. Hall, try it again. Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Chastain,
Yes.
Mr. Ford,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
All right, thank you. The motion carries. We have an agenda. So we'll now proceed to our committee work. And I note to the committee chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call. I now recognize Dr. Oxendine, Chair of the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. And joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. We have 3 items. Well, we'll include a 4th item if we count the consent. The first item is an action. We have a discussion item. We have a new business item. I will return to the action item, which is the report from the committee, the State Board Task Force on K-3 Literacy. This task force was chaired by Drs. Ann Clark and Crystal Hill. We had a wide representation serving on the task force to include our LEAs, our EPPs, DPI staff, someone from the governor's office, and our State Board of Education advisor, and perhaps other stakeholders that Drs. Clark and Hill will bring forward in just a moment. This is, in a way, in the back of my head, I hear the drum roll, because we have been talking about the work of the task force and anticipating the recommendations for quite some time. The work has been vigorous, and the work has been good, comprised of 3 subcommittees, and out of those subcommittees, a total of 21 recommendations that will be that are being presented to us today. Certainly not for approval. The purpose of this presentation and this work is we are receiving these 21 recommendations. I want us to listen to them, ask good questions, and at the conclusion of the presentation, I will come back to Chair Davis and share, in my mind, the next steps in terms of an approach to move forward with these recommendations. So with that said, I will call on Drs. Clark and Hill to make the presentation.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, members of the State Board of Education. It is indeed a professional privilege to come before you to share the unanimously supported recommendations from your appointed Literacy Task Force. Chair Davis and other board members, consider these recommendations an important piece of the North Carolina response to the clarion call Board Member Ford issued for all of us just a few minutes ago. In the words of Kofi Annan, literacy is the road to human progress and the means through which every man, woman, and child can realize his or her full potential. Literacy is a bridge from misery to hope. Before I turn the recommendations over to our subcommittee chairs who have ably led this work over the last 7 months, I wanted to start by framing so there is clarity as we move through our recommendations about our approach to literacy. And that begins with a definition. And I will take the liberty of reading that definition in order to not fail to be comprehensive in how I present this initial very important component that will be the foundation of the recommendations you will hear about in just a minute. A comprehensive approach to literacy encompasses reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and occurs in a safe, nurturing, and culturally responsive environment. High-quality reading instruction is grounded in the current science of reading and addresses the acquisition of language to include syntax, semantics, morphology, and pragmatics, phonological and phonemic awareness, accurate and efficient word identification and spelling, world knowledge, and comprehension. It is guided by state-adopted standards and informed by valid and reliable assessment data, so instruction can be differentiated to meet the needs of individual students. High-quality reading instruction includes explicit and systematic phonics instruction, allowing all students to master letter-sound relations so they can understand the meaning of increasingly complex text. So at this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Crystal Hill, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Beth Folger, Deputy Superintendent of the Onslow County Schools, Dr. Melba Spooner, Dean of the Wright College of Education at Appalachian State Universities. These three individuals have very ably led our subcommittees that have focused on pre-service preparation and licensure, curriculum and instructional resources, and professional development. And I will invite Dr. Melba Spooner to walk us through our recommendations in the pre-service preparation and licensure area.
Thank you very much, Ann. Good morning. Chair Davis, members of the board, thank you for the honor to be with you today. You have helped my heart. Thank you for your unwavering commitment to all that we're doing. As Ann said, I will now share with you the recommendations from the Pre-Service Preparation and Licensure Subcommittee. Recommendation 1, set clear expectations that early childhood, elementary, special education, and educational leadership preparation programs align their curriculum to the principles and practices identified in the Standards for the Preparation of Literacy Professionals, 2017, and the International Dyslexia Association Knowledge and Practice Standards for Teaching of Reading. Both of these standards have references of 2018. Recommendation 2, require all educator preparation programs to be referenced in the future text as EPPs to engage candidates in intentionally sequenced clinical experiences that include opportunities to A, observe literacy teaching practices, e.g. faculty, university supervisors, mentors, that reflect the principles and practices of the current science of reading. B, to engage in early, deliberate, and sustained practice opportunities during which candidates enact the principles and practices associated with the current science of reading, e.g. low-stakes practice with teacher educators and peers, authentic practice opportunities with children in early and elementary settings. And C, to receive substantive and actionable feedback on enacted teaching practice using an observation instrument focused on the principles and practices identified within the current science of reading, especially as it relates to the teaching of reading. Recommendation 3, direct the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, local education agencies, and EPPs, nonprofit agencies, and community stakeholders to collaborate on the alignment between pre-service educator preparation of early childhood, elementary, and special education candidates, and the expectations and principles and professional development of in-service teachers. Related recommendations also include advocate for, identify, and distribute funds to support EPPs and their P12 partners to develop and implement redesigned programs. To that end, EPPs should design and refine coursework grounded in principles and practices aligned with the current science of reading and the standards of reading professionals. B, provide high-quality clinical experiences and coursework that increase in complexity over time. And C, develop and implement meaningful and common assessments of candidate learning. These data can also be used to inform the continuous improvement of EPPs. As well, LEAs should design and refine professional development for in-service teachers grounded in principles and practices identified within the current science of reading, as well as develop meaningful and common assessments of teacher learning, as well as clear methods for feedback to teachers. And these data will also be used to inform continuous improvement of instructional programs. Recommendation 4, to provide compensation incentives for teachers, teacher leaders, instructional coaches, and school leaders with master's degrees in reading or a master's level reading specialist certificate from an approved EPP. Recommendation number 5, develop a comprehensive statewide strategic plan for recruiting and retaining underrepresented diverse candidates to become early childhood, elementary, English language learner, and special education teachers trained in the current science of reading. Recommendation number 6, require all EPP educational leadership programs to include meaningful and in-depth curriculum based on the current science of teaching reading. And finally, recommendation number 7, define a statewide common definition of ready on day 1 to distinguish between a novice teacher of reading and a master teacher of reading. Thank you. I will now turn over the mic to Beth Folger, who will walk us through the next set of recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. Spooner. The next set of recommendations is in the area of curriculum and instructional resources, and the 7 recommendations of the subcommittee actually create a pathway for a teacher's successful transition from preparation and licensure to effective instruction and improved outcomes. So it is that pathway from being prepared, gaining your licensure, getting your degree, and then moving into the classroom, and what do you need to be successful once you get to the classroom. Recommendation number 1 is to create guidance and resources to support the understanding of the current science of reading. Some examples include a definition, a model, framework, resources for teachers, caregivers, and family. And this recommendation really ensures that there's shared meaning and consistent communication statewide and across stakeholder groups, and does not leave that up to individual LEAs to interpret and then carry out the work, but creates a consistent message statewide. Recommendation number 2 is to identify, fund, and implement a valid and reliable literacy screener or diagnostic that aligns with the current science of reading, and administer to all K-3 students and to 4th and 5th graders who are below grade level in reading. This tool that we're all familiar with, of course, helps teachers identify student needs and determine what comes next in the learning pathway. Our next 2 recommendations, recommendations 3 and 4, will address the curriculum and instructional resources that teachers need in order to help students learn to read and to develop those foundational literacy skills. So recommendation number 3 is define criteria for selecting evidence-based instructional resources, and that is inclusive of core instruction, supplemental instruction, and intensive intervention resources that are aligned to the current science of reading. Assist public school units with identification of instructional curriculum and resources that meet the criteria for alignment with the current science of reading. And again, this was asking for assistance so that every public school unit or LEA who may not have the capacity to do the heavy lifting is assisted through the department in finding evidence-based resources. Recommendation number 4, once those resources have been identified, as in recommendation 3, recommendation 4 is to allocate funding for only evidence-based instructional resources. Again, at all 3 tiers, core, supplemental, and intensive, that are aligned to the current science of reading, so that every K-5 student has equitable access to evidence-based literacy curriculum and instructional materials. I think this is very important, that every child in the state of North Carolina should have access to quality curriculum and materials. Recommendation number 5, allocate funding for only high-quality professional development and job-embedded coaching so that all teachers receive consistent feedback and support to implement the district-selected evidence-based resources at the core, supplemental, and intensive intervention levels aligned to the current science of reading. So not only do these complex tiered resources that we're talking about need to be accessible for every teacher, student, and parent, but also the resources need to be used in a manner that the research has shown is effective. The implementation target must be clear and measurable. Therefore, recommendation number 6 reads, in order to support the highest quality reading instruction, develop an implementation rubric aligned to the current science of reading. This tool could be used by teachers, school leaders, and district leaders to assess and reflect on the implementation of instructional practices and strategies aligned with the current science of reading. Lastly, it will be important that educators continue to receive the united message that early literacy instructional practices must reflect the current science of reading and must evolve as the science around reading does. So therefore, recommendation number 7 is align all NCDPI created, purchased, and shared literacy resources with the current science of reading, including, but certainly not limited to, formative and summative assessments, shared resource banks, state purchased literacy materials, or shared digital content. So in other words, all resources that teachers receive are aligned to the science of reading so that there's no confusion about appropriate pedagogy. So that summarizes our recommendations for the curriculum and instructional services. And Dr. Hill, I believe, will be sharing the professional development.
Thank you, Beth. The last set of recommendations is professional development, and this, of course, comes through the lens of ensuring the importance of ongoing high-quality professional development and job-embedded coaching. So our first recommendation is to allocate funding to support ongoing professional development for kindergarten through 5th grade teachers, teacher leaders, literacy coaches, and school leaders. This professional development will address the current science of reading, utilizing multiple learning approaches, job-embedded coaching, and a variety of digital platforms. Recommendation number 2, fund literacy coaches for every elementary school with at least one coach dedicated to kindergarten through 2nd grade and one coach dedicated to grades 3 through 5. Recommendation number 3, establish advanced degree compensation for kindergarten through 5th grade literacy coaches trained in the current science of reading. Recommendation number 4, require 30 contact hours of literacy professional development based on the current science of reading for elementary teacher licensure renewal. Recommendation number 5, develop and offer an early literacy micro-credential, at least 60 contact hours, that requires candidates to demonstrate proficiency in the acquisition of language, which includes syntax, semantics, morphology, and pragmatics, phonological and phonemic awareness, accurate and efficient word identification and spelling, word knowledge, and comprehension. Recommendation number 6, require 5 contact hours for literacy professional development based on the current science of reading for principal licensure renewal. And finally, recommendation number 7, provide opportunities and incentives for educators who work with pre-service teachers, including clinical faculty, mentors, and university supervisors, to engage in professional learning opportunities to enhance their ability to support candidates' enactment of principles and practices identified within seminal and current research that result in a literacy credential. The State Board of Education should work with EPPs to convene a team of North Carolina literacy experts to identify or develop online, self-paced, and face-to-face training modules. Training modules should cover principles of the current science of reading, focused on reading and evidence-based methods. Examples are modeling, practice, and feedback. At this time, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Clark.
Thank thank you to Melba, Beth, and Crystal for sharing the recommendations. A couple of summary comments before I turn it back over to Chair Davis. I became a teacher in North Carolina in 1983. I finished my career as a public school educator in 2017 as a superintendent. In that time period, one of my regrets is that the achievement gap that we so frequently talk about in public education was narrowed only modestly. One of the reasons I said yes to multiple opportunities over the last 2 years to engage in advancing a stronger literacy effort in our state was the opportunity not just to continue to focus on narrowing the achievement gap, but ultimately to eliminate that achievement gap. Those of you who know me know that I believe in fire prevention, not firefighting. These 21 recommendations provide a unique opportunity for our state to be in the fire prevention business and not the firefighting business as it relates to producing on grade level or higher readers across our state. The important thing to understand in these recommendations is that you will be tempted perhaps to isolate or focus on specific recommendations. But our task force would argue that it is the collective impact of all the recommendations together that will truly move us toward that opportunity to eliminate the achievement gap with a specific focus on producing readers across our state. So I invite you to resist the temptation to be selective in your attention to specific recommendations and instead attend to the recommendations in their entirety as a vehicle to prepare teachers to teach reading, to provide high quality resources and ongoing high quality professional development. The unique opportunity the State Board of Education afforded our literacy task force is to not focus on isolated recommendations around pre-service and licensure or to focus on K-12. Because at the end of the day, we all know that it is the combination of how our teachers are prepared and how they are received in classrooms across our state with high quality materials and professional development to support the continued growth of our teachers of reading. It is that collective set of recommendations that we believe has the potential to change the landscape for our state and more importantly for our children at this critical time, as we have all acknowledged this morning, as we approach this work with heavy hearts, but with the need for a focus on the opportunities to change what exists today. So with that, I want to thank in particular Deanna Townsend-Smith and Danielle Allen for their extraordinary support. We would not be at the finish line without their incredible guidance and stewardship every step of the way. And it's stating the obvious, but we had an extraordinary, by design, cross-functional team of the best experts from higher ed and K-12 representing teachers, principals, chief academic officers, superintendents, faculty, reading faculty at our EPPs across the state. I would also remind you from our previous report that these recommendations stand on the shoulders of the UNC General Administration, Teacher Education Advisory Council, as well as a community of practice made up of deans and reading faculty from the UNC system. So it is the combination of their work and our work that brings us to where we are today, and we're excited to officially present these recommendations to the State Board.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Clark, and those who participated in the presentation of this report and the 21 recommendations. I would open the floor to my colleagues on the State Board for any questions that you might have or commentary.
Dr. Oxendine, JB.
Yes, Mr. Buxton.
Thank you. A couple questions and then a comment. And first, a thank you. I know we promised this task force 3 months, and then they requested to extend it. think they've been laboring for about 6 months, and I would just say succinctly, it's worth the wait. I'm excited about what is here. My questions, and I just have two, and it may be for the task force leadership or perhaps Dr. Spooner. First one is on pre-service, and just a clarifying question perhaps about, I think it's recommendations 1, 2, 3, and 6, the first half of 3 and 6. Feel to me like they would lend themselves to a revision of our current program approval approach and what we require in ways of standards and expectations and programmatic change. And I'm just wondering if that is a correct way to read those recommendations and what action might need to result from them.
Board Member Buxton, you are correct in terms of that assumption. I have had an initial conversation with Tom Tomlin in the Licensure Department about implications as well as it relates specifically to licensure and opportunities in terms of a next step, which I think Dr. Oxendine will highlight in a few moments in terms of reviewing these recommendations and determining implications for licensure that would in turn go to Pepsi.
Thank you. Second question, if I could, Dr. Oxendine.
You may. Mm-hmm.
If I go to the second section, which on curriculum and instructional resources, and look at recommendation 4, which I want to strongly support personally, but I just wanted to ask if the idea here would be, and I guess maybe it's recommendations 3 and 4, excuse me, whether we would look, one possible avenue here would be for the department to identify a vetted list of high quality instructional resources that meet the definition here and provide choice to districts about which ones they would use, but not going beyond that set of choices for use of state funding on instructional materials and curriculum.
So certainly that, at the end of the day, we want school districts to make the decisions that fit their context and where they are with their own professional development and resources. But if we do not put guardrails in place as it relates to making sure that we are using our state funding for evidence-based materials and resources, then we will have what we have today, which is our pre-service teachers going into classrooms for their student teaching and then into the classroom as teachers, having been trained in the current science of reading and finding themselves with materials that don't support that current science of reading. As Dr. Folger mentioned, there are certainly districts that will need support from the department in vetting materials, and there are other districts that have tremendous capacity and expertise to do that, but making sure that the funding only is invested in those evidence-based resources.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. And Dr. Oxendine, just a brief statement, if I could.
Absolutely.
At the risk of seeming a little bit too Pollyannish, I've not understood for almost 2 years of doing this work why our state should not be the leader in literacy, in early literacy, especially in this country. We have a governor who is supportive. We have a legislature who has been supportive for years. We have a UNC system who has already pushed in on this issue and is a system and so can move agendas as one. We have private universities and colleges who have committed to be part of this and many times act like a system themselves. And we have an approach to funding and a department who I think is focused in the right way, a board who is focused. We've been real continuous improvement kind of state and putting pieces in place as we've learned what has worked and what hasn't worked. And I really see this document as the missing piece of the puzzle. We have all those other pieces that I think many states don't have. And I think this gives us a path, and this gives us a common agenda that all those different constituents and leaders can unite behind. I'm sure there will be different ways to think about implementing different pieces, and we'll get other feedback as people react to this report. But I see this report as in some ways the last piece to empower and support our educators and our communities to do what they need to do with our students, so that we are in, I thought Dr. Clark's great metaphor, in the fire prevention business, not the firefighting business. So I am extremely excited to see this. I am very thankful to the members of this task force who put in a lot of time and under tough circumstances with the pandemic to come together, and excited about where this goes. Thank you, Dr. Octenauer.
And thank you, Mr. Buxton. And do I hear from other board members with questions or comments?
This is Mariah Morris, and I have a comment.
I hear a voice. If you would identify yourself.
Yes, this is Mariah Morris. I have a comment.
Sure, Mariah.
I had the opportunity to participate in this task force, and I second a lot of what Mr. Buxton said about the promising nature of this document. I want to connect this work right now, though, with the sentiments that we talked about at the beginning of our message, our meeting, with the message of being committed to the equity of our Black and brown students across the state. We know the direct correlations, reading abilities, and our life outcomes, and that's why we have focused so much on this task force and moving reading forward in our state. The research is clear that learning to read and to read well can change lives. And we also know that in North Carolina, our Black, Hispanic, and American Indian students are not reaching the same reading proficiencies as their white peers in the classes with them. I believe that given this data, the onus is on us as a board to recognize our sphere of influence and work towards making changes at the state level to create these equitable learning environments that we talked about at the beginning of our meeting. And this is a great tangible way to make sure that our Black, Hispanic, and American Indian students can achieve the same reading proficiency rates as their white peers. To this point, I would urge that the state board create a B12 literacy and racial equity work group that includes stakeholders from our Black and brown communities to lead this work and to make sure that we are moving forward with literacy in a racially equitable opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mariah. And that, to that, you're already giving me an idea to tag on to somewhere in our next steps agenda, where we go next with these 21 recommendations. Do I hear other comments or questions? Thank you so much, Mariah, for that. That's a very good idea, very creative at the moment. Other comments or questions from my colleagues?
Madam Chair, this is Mr. Ford, and just as a point of clarification, I'd like to echo Mariah's sentiments. And is it in order for a board member to make an official motion to that end, or how should that proceed?
I think a way that we could definitely be definite about that, Mr. Ford, is to ensure that it is part of the next phase, which I don't want to make sound like next phase is 2 years from now, but soon to follow today, and include that idea in our next step phase. Is one way we could definitely address that and have that presence at the implementation step.
Okay, so just want to make sure I'm clear. So as part of the implementation, ensuring that a racial equity subcommittee or working group is a part of that?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, I appreciate it.
Absolutely, and you might want to invite yourself to that group.
I make a business of inviting myself places, Madam Chair.
The one question that I do have in thinking about poring over these 21 recommendations the last couple of days, especially last night, I'm reading through them and I'm thinking each one could stand alone as a separate task force, because so much substance and process and ideas are embedded in them, and that will never happen. We will never, I don't have enough time left on the state board to be a part of 21 task forces. What I would like to, but let me pose a question first. If you go back to the original intent of the task force, and that purpose, the purpose of the task force is in the, I think, the first paragraph of page 1 of the report itself. I feel the need to make sure that EPPs are a part of the discussions around these recommendations, because the purpose of the task force was to, one of the purposes, not the only, but the primary purpose was to impact programs at the EPP level that prepare our teachers to be strong teachers of reading and literacy. So to that end, some of the recommendations, the first component, the first 7 recommendations certainly go to the heart of the work around EPPs. Some of the others seem to have more implications for school districts or DPI or other stakeholder groups. So it's going to be very important as we move forward to make sure that we have that EPP feel to the implementation going forward with these recommendations. They need to be represented, deans and reading faculty and others need to be at the table, even when we discuss things like developing curricula, developing resources, and other areas specifics that roll out into the recommendations. A more specific question goes back to the first recommendation in the category pre-service and licensure. And the question, the recommendation speaks to the need of 2 bodies of standards. And Dr. Clark, if you could address this, the question that I have around that. Is the task force recommending those 2 bodies of standards, or is the recommendation that the State Board of Education make some decision about those standards?
So as you can imagine, we had lengthy discussions about where we would want to offer guidance. And at the end of the day, many of the K-12 educators on our task force felt like the IDA standards gave more specific guidance to teachers that might be helpful, but certainly the ILA standards certainly have an important role to play. So we felt like it was important to put both of those standards down as guidance, and certainly can follow up with any specific questions as you begin thinking about implementation that you might have there. But wanting to make sure that we identified standards that we felt like would be both helpful to our higher ed partners as well as our K-12 teachers, and specifically K-3 teachers.
So to be more succinct in my question, then you aren't recommending both sets. These are what you would like for the going forward for the group that comes around the table to think next steps, to consider one or the other, or maybe additional bodies of standards. Is this something for the next group to consider, to discuss?
We would be recommending that these be the standards that guide the work as you move forward.
So an EPP would be charged to, in the design of new courses and programs, would be charged to tailor those programs to 2 sets of standards. Is that correct?
Let me let Dr. Spooner respond to that, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Oxendine, I'll just say that as we did move through this, as Ann Clark just indicated, we talked about these for guidance, and there was a lot of discussion about one set of standards or both sets of standards. And essentially, I think most of our programs already utilize a lot of this work around the ILA standards. They cover a lot, but if in fact we use, if we don't broaden that scope to some degree, we believe there will be a gap in working with students who are struggling readers, who may also experience some forms of dyslexia. So we're putting forth the recommendation to consider both sets of standards as programs are developed and revised or refined, to utilize those to make sure that we're identifying all indicators across children who may have some ability or disability to effectively meet their grade levels, or even in the learning of early reading. So yes, we are saying we in higher ed and EPPs should utilize both sets of standards in development programs.
All right, thank you ever so much, that clarity. And I must beg my colleagues around the state board table to bear with me for pressing that point, because standards, the design of courses and programs around standards at the EPP level become very tedious at certain points. And I needed to hear that clarity, so going forward, the next group that comes together to decide going forward, we will have the clarity from the task force that is your intent. So thank you for that clarity. If there are no other questions or comments from my colleagues, again, thank you ever so much to the task force members, to the co-chairs, and to Deanna Townsend-Smith for all the hard work that you have done to make this possible and bring it forward to the state board today. And Chair Davis, what I would like to propose going forward is that very soon we assemble a small group of individuals to include the leadership of the task force and perhaps the chairs of the subcommittees, the DPI consultants, those that from DPI who worked on the task force, and any others who can come together and assemble a small kind of thinking forward as to where to go next with these recommendations. They perhaps need to be clarified a bit more. We perhaps need to think about a routing mechanism. Perhaps some of the recommendations could be meat added to the bones within DPI. Perhaps some of the recommendations with work need to be channeled to Pepsi. And there may be some other avenues that the recommendations need to take, but we just need to assemble. I would ask of you to grant permission to assemble a small working team to lay out the next steps.
Yes, Dr. Oxendine, that sounds like an appropriate response, and really appreciate the urgency and the focus by having a small group come together that can keep this work moving forward. Thanks.
Absolutely. We do not want it to go on a shelf and become a memory. So thank you very much to the task force. And with that, I'll move on to the second item on my agenda, which is a discussion item. This is ES&P 2, and I believe Dr. Kim Evans is going to present this, and it pertains to some changes in cut scores and test codes in our policies and our manuals that contain information related to licensure testing. And this is pertaining to the category of reading and audiology. So I will turn to Dr. Evans for this report, for this information.
Good morning, state board members. This is Dr. Evans. I have two updates for two of the licensure exams, and I just want everyone to know that these are vendor-based updates. So this is with ETS's process, their standards setting study process that they go through, and they use experts in the field to provide these updates. And the first update is for the reading specialist test, or for the graduate level, and this test is number 5301 currently. and it's effective until August 2021. And this would change to 5302, so the new test code would be 5302, and that would be effective beginning September 2020 with a new cut score of 165, which would make the current cut score 164. And then the second test is for audiology, as Dr. Oxendine referred to previously, and the current test code is 5342, and this would change to 5343, and that would start being effective beginning September 2020 with the current test staying effective until August 2021. And the cut score would change from 170 to 162. And I wanted the board to know that ETS has let me know that the professional organization, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, has approved and endorses this test for audiologists.
Okay, very good. Dr. Evans, if you would just take a minute to, when we hear of a licensure test declining in a cut score, for instance, the audiology test going from 170, I think I heard you say 162.
Yes.
Statistically, that's not, pardon me?
That's correct, that's correct.
Yes. Statistically, we shouldn't be alarmed by that. Could you explain, even though that's an 8-point difference, what does that really mean?
Right, so with their standard setting study, they take into consideration what new content needs to be in there for audiologists, and then also the number of questions might not necessarily be as great as what it was. So content-wise versus, as well as the number of questions, and then also they look at the experts in the field that are on both of the panels. The first panel, they look at the questions autonomously, and then the second panel, they do a panel discussion to look at the questions. And then according to actually taking the test and looking at the results, they base the cut score on the results of taking the test by the experts. So the experts actually take the test as well. So it's based on the content revision as well as the number of questions that are revised.
Thank you very much. Board members, at some point, we might have an interest in down the road to hear Dr. Tomberlin or Dr. Evans or Dr. Seiberg come back to us and share a bit more information about audiologists in our school districts. The question might be, do all school districts have an audiologist or an audiology team? What do they do? And are they serving the general population of students, or are they working within the venue of EC or some other department? So that might be something we want to learn more about down the road. So thank you, Dr. Evans, for that discussion item and adding the detail to it.
You're welcome.
So board members, that is a discussion item, and that will come back to us next month. The next item is a new business item. And this is one of those reports that I always look forward to. It is the every 2 years across the state of North Carolina, we gather data, and it is reported in the through the teacher working conditions survey, and that helps the State Board of Education and our school districts and our schools determine, whether the environment is set right for teaching and learning in our classrooms and our school buildings. So to present this current report, the current collection of data to the board is Dr. Cynthia Martin.
Good morning, Superintendent Johnson, Chair Davis, State Board members, and advisors. As stated, I am Cynthia Martin, Director of District and Regional Support. It is a pleasure to share the preliminary findings of the 10th iteration of the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey. TWC is a statewide service provided by district and regional support. Today, I want to share general information about the survey respondents, and highlight just a few details from the initial review of the survey. This is an enormous body of data that we are just beginning to dig into. With today's presentation, results at the local, district, and state level become public at the TWC website, www.asqnc.com. That's www.asknc.com. In 2002, then Governor Easley led the effort to administer the first ever statewide survey of teaching conditions in the nation. North Carolina became the first state in the nation to study teacher working conditions by surveying those whose opinions matter most, teachers. The survey is administered every 2 years, as Dr. Oxendine said. 2020 serves as the 10th iteration of the survey. The survey is undeniably a part of the educational landscape in our state, as it is included in many state policies governing school improvement plans, NESAs, ESSA, and our state equity plan. Next, please. Areas of teaching conditions measured include school leadership, teacher leadership, instructional practices and supports, managing student conduct, professional learning, community support and involvement, use of time, facilities and resources, and new teacher support. In August of 2019, the 24-member advisory committee, which is comprised of teachers, principals, school counselors, superintendents, and state-level leaders, hammered out and approved 2 new sections to the survey: school safety and equity. For a list of those who serve on the advisory committee, please visit the website. The list is there. The survey opened on March 1st with an initial end date of March 31st. We did make the decision to extend the survey by 1 week to try to give additional opportunity for staff to take the survey. It closed on April the 7th. The Ask NC website was the hub for everything. Here, respondents logged on to take the survey and also accessed the help desk if they needed assistance with the survey. Next slide. Prior to the closing of schools on March 16, due to COVID-19, North Carolina had outpaced itself compared to other survey years. On March 16th, the survey had registered 81,163, or 66% of educators participating. Once the stay-at-home order was issued, DRS suspended the communication plan that is usually put in place to accompany the survey. However, the regional education facilitators, along with DRS leads, did assist any educators who contacted us needing help with the survey. Dr. Richard Ingerstall is a professor of education and sociology within the Education Policy Division at the Graduate School of Education and senior researcher at the Consortium for Policy Research in Education at the University of Pennsylvania. In November, at the State Board Planning meeting, we shared with you his research on teaching conditions using the Teacher Working Conditions Survey. This data involved 16 states, including North Carolina, and looked at the years of data from 2011 to 2015. This slide has a quote of his independent review of the results. I will not read the entire statement, but I will share one line. So it appears that the statewide closure of schools due to the COVID-19 pandemic did not lead to a far more negative response in the school conditions on the part of teachers in North Carolina. Let's take a look at the survey respondents. The 2020 survey had 102,545 educators participate out of a possible 121,424 educators for a response rate of 84.45%. For comparison, in 2018, we had a 91% participation rate. In order for a school to generate a data report, they must have a response rate of at least 40% with at least 5 respondents. The chart shows the breakdown of schools by type that were able to meet the minimum response rate. For the 2020 survey, 94.5% of schools received a report. For comparison, in 2018, 98% of schools received a report. Next slide. This slide shows the breakdown of participants, with teachers being the largest group and other educational professionals being the second largest group. They were followed by assistant principals and then principals. The next slide compares respondents by role to the 2018 response. All areas show a decline in participation in 2020. Next slide, please. This chart shows the percentage of respondents by years of experience. Those in the 11 to 20 years of experience band once again made up the greatest percentage of respondents, with 33% of respondents are in years 11 to 20. Next slide. Over the next few slides, I would like to highlight a few results. This is based on a preliminary review. It is the hope that the State Board will invite us back to do a deeper dive into the data based on feedback and stakeholder interests. When we talk about results of the survey, we use the term rate of agreement. Most, not all, but most of the questions ask participants how strongly they agree with different statements that describe their work environments. Choices include strongly agree, agree, strongly disagree, disagree, and don't know. The rate of agreement is the sum of respondents who agree or strongly agree to the survey question. Later, we will look at the rate of agreement at the construct level. Next slide. The following table shows the top 7 highest rates of agreement. It also shows the rate of agreement of same items in 2018. Most agreed upon in our state for 2020 is the curriculum taught in this school is aligned with the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. Remember, this is the perception of those in school buildings. School-based staff members take the survey. School safety, our newest area, has claimed 4 of the top 7 rates of agreement. Questions like, the school has a written plan that clearly describes procedures to be performed in natural disasters. Teachers in this school know what to do if there is an emergency. The staff has a written plan that describes procedures to be performed in active shooter situations or lockdown. And at this school, staff are not bullied about their religion. These were the top rates of agreement for the 2020 survey. This list shows you additional high rates of agreement. Next slide, please. This slide starts the lowest rates of agreement. If we could go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the lowest of the low. The lowest 2 items fall under instructional practices and support. The questions deal with access to internet and digital devices for the completion of homework. Only 54.7% and 52.4% of teachers agree with these two statements respectively. We worked with Digital Teaching and Learning to add these questions in 2018. We recognized a decline in response from 2018 to 2020. Only 57.5% of teachers agree that bullying is not a frequent problem at this school, which means that 43% of teachers do believe it is a problem. Next, the fourth lowest rate of agreement deal with time. Only 61% of teachers believe that class sizes are reasonable, such that teachers have time available to meet the needs of all students, which means 39% do not believe that these class sizes are reasonable to meet the needs of all students. The next slide shows the largest increase in agreement between 2016 to 2020 or 2018 to 2020. The hunger question added in 2018 asked participants to pick an answer that best describes their school relationship with child hunger. This answer choice shows the largest increase in rate of agreement of any question in 2020. The question is hunger, or the choice, the answer choice chosen for 49% of our teachers. Hunger is a problem for my students, but my school uses creative strategies to combat it. Other increases in rate of agreement include, in this school, we use the results of the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey for school improvement planning. The survey has been given since 2002, and so the fact that that is increasing in the rate of agreement every year speaks to the utility of the data. The reliability and speed of the internet connections in this school are sufficient to support instructional practice. One of the largest increases from 2016 to present that talks about the internet connection in the school. Let's look at the decreases in rate of agreement. Teachers regularly assign homework that require access to a digital device to complete. That is down in rate of agreement. Students at this school follow rules of conduct. That is also a drop from 2016 to 2018. School administrators consistently enforce rules for student conduct. That is a decrease in the rate of agreement from 2018 to 2020. And teachers are protected from duties that interfere with their essential role of educating students. Also a decrease. Let's look at construct averages. These items represent the rate of agreement at the construct level. This is computed by calculating the average rate of agreement across items within the given construct. For example, if respondents indicate agree or strongly agree for 4 out of the 8 items within the construct, their rate of agreement for the given construct is 50. If you look, these charts show the construct average from 2016 to 2018 to 2020. Most of them are holding consistently or show a dip in 2020. The one that I would like to call your attention to is on the next slide. All of the construct averages rate of agreement are down, but the one that I would like the opportunity to dig into is the instructional practices and support. It is down to pre-2016 levels after reaching such a high level in 2018. More analysis of the data is needed to point to why this is, but teachers have identified instructional practices and support is one of the most influential working condition when it comes to student achievement. So more time is needed on that item. Next slide, please. So principals take the survey too. They have a set of questions just for them. The results are displayed in the aggregate every year. The results are prominently displayed on the new website because I've received plenty of feedback from people saying that they did not know that principals had separate questions. The following table shows items with highest rates of agreement for the principal survey. The highest rate of agreement involves how well the principal feels he or she is addressing teachers' concerns about issues of school leadership. The last item is about the principal's knowledge about issues in the community. Principals rated themselves highly in this area. The next chart shows items with the lowest rate of agreement for the principal survey. All of the items were in the new section on safety except for one. They involve cyberbullying, bullying, and physical conflict among students. The non-safety item involved time. Only 60% of principals agree that they are provided time for networking and collaboration outside of the district. The next slide is a slide we present every time we do the survey. It talks about immediate employment plan. For the 2020 survey, 81% of teachers plan to continue teaching at their schools. Only 4% of those surveyed reported that they would leave education entirely. Next slide. This is also a popular piece of data that we share every 2 years. School leadership remains the highest rated item for why teachers keep teaching at their school. As we know, leadership matters. This question, which aspect of your teaching conditions is most important to you in promoting student learning? Almost a third of the teaching workforce says it is instructional practices and a support. This is the area that I identified when we looked at the construct averages. But teachers have identified it as the condition that they use to promote student learning, that is most important to them in promoting student learning. Next slide. So earlier in the presentation, I talked about the research of Dr. Richard Ingerstall. His research in partnership with our vendor has given us a new lens to view the TWC results. All districts receive their data reports based on their Ingerstall research in 2018. It is our hope to provide this for the 2020 data, along with support in understanding and utilizing. Next slide. Ingerstall found students in school with the higher levels of school leadership and teacher leadership, as in the teacher working conditions survey sections, perform at least 10 percentage points higher in both math and English language arts proficiency on their state assessment after controlling for poverty and other demographic factors. These 5 questions are closely related to student achievement. His research found that these 5 questions are most closely related. Under instructional leadership, Ingerstall's research identified holding teachers to high standards, providing an effective school improvement team, and fostering a shared vision for the school. Under teacher leadership, Ingerstall's research identified teacher voice in establishing discipline procedures and school improvement planning. And that rounds up the 5 questions that we look at when we apply this to the data. Here is the comparison using those 5 survey elements identified by Ingerstall as most connected to student achievement. For the majority of our schools, these school leadership items show strong agreement, but teacher decision-making items, we find a lower rate of agreement. This is especially true for schools that struggle. Data shows that there is an imbalance in instructional leadership and teacher roles in decision making. Next slide. So I pulled a few slides. If you looked at the slide deck, there are 70, and I won't go over anywhere near that, but I did pull a few because I wanted to bring that information and highlight it for the board. I have referenced hunger before, but I wanted to make sure I showcased all of the responses to the hunger question. Teachers could choose only one answer. Hunger continues to be a major platform issue for the Teacher and Principal of the Year cohorts, as well as the amazing work done by Dr. Lynn Harvey and her team. Hopefully, we can drill down using this data to match the resources with the need. 14% of teachers surveyed identify hunger is a problem for my students, and it causes problems in my classroom and school. I also wanted to highlight the new sections. So the first section, the new section, deals with equity. And in light of recent events, I tried not to put too much emphasis on one question, but it just weighed on me a little bit as I was reviewing the results. So when we look at the equity section and we look at the 3 questions that had the lowest rate of agreement for equity, these are the 3 lowest. School rules are applied equitably to all students. At this school, all students are treated equitably, justly, and fairly. And then the programs and resources at this school are adequate to support students with special needs or disability. Those 3 questions had the lowest rate of agreement from teachers in our state. Next slide. All right, safety, second new section. The question was, the following types of problems rarely occur at this school. Okay, so only 64% of teachers said physical conflict was a rare problem. Only 74% said vandalism was a rare problem. And then 87% identified possession of weapons as a rare problem. Next slide. So in the survey, we did define bullying and cyberbullying, and then we asked them if this was a frequent problem at this school. 58% of those surveyed said bullying is not a frequent problem at this school. And for cyberbullying, only 63% identified this as not a problem. And so what I'd like to do is to reverse that to say, well, what is the number for those who are saying it is a problem? So if I reverse that for bullying, I come up with 42% of our teacher workforce. And if I reverse that for cyberbullying, I come up with 37%. Okay. Now these questions were interesting to me. We asked the same question for students and the same question for staff. So at this school, students are not bullied when it comes to their race. Only 73% of teachers agreed to that. Students are not bullied based on ethnicity. Only 74% agreed with that. students are not bullied because of their cultural background. 74% agreed. Students are not bullied about their religion. Only 86% agreed. We asked the staff too, because we do want to know about the total working condition. So how are staff treated? That same question was asked. 93% of staff or educators said they are not bullied because of race. 94% said they are not bullied because of ethnicity. 93% said not bullied because of the cultural background. 95% said not bullied because of religion. Safety did extremely well when we came to general safety procedures. I think this slide reflects well of how North Carolina is performing in this area. It asks, do you know what to do in case of different emergencies, and is there ongoing training and safety procedures? Over 94% of the educational workforce agreed with these items. I have a number of slides remaining, but I have put these here just for your reference. All items should be available on the asknc.com website. I asked for the website to go live with this presentation, so anyone can go to that website and not only look at the state aggregate, which I've shared with you, but also look at the data for the 95% of schools who have a data report. At this time, I'm happy to try to answer any questions or any feedback.
Dr. Oxendine, it's JD.
Go ahead, Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, yes, Mr. Buxton, go ahead.
First, I just want to recognize what ways this has come from its first iterations and the incredible data set we have here, and the additions of things like safety and equity, which not just in this moment, but in general are important areas. Just the incredible school improvement planning tool we have here, as well as insight into the profession, but probably more importantly, what it gives to teachers, teacher leaders, school building leaders, district leaders, to not just have a snapshot, but trend data. I'm just amazed as we're walking through the level of data and some of the early looks at the website that we were given. So one, I just want to recognize how lucky we are and appreciate the department's great stewardship of this resource. Second thing is, I think the degree to which we see increases in the working conditions survey being used in school improvement, based on some previous discussions we've had, is all about Dr. Martin, your commitment to having regional case managers use these results, make it available to people, help them walk through it. And also, it's probably why we're getting such good feedback, that people believe it is going to be used, and people believe school leaders and policymakers are going to look at what teachers are saying and pay attention to teacher voice and principal voice in looking at policy decisions and revisions and how to improve schools. I'm just amazed at the enormity of the data set, and proud of our state stewardship of this. Dr. Martin, especially appreciative of your leadership of this. I'm sure I'll have a bunch of questions when I start looking at the data, but the amount of data and what it can give us as we also start to rethink and rebuild school improvement and assistance, the resources, amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. Do I have anyone else have questions or comments with regard to this fine report? Did I hear someone?
Yes, Dr. Oxendine, this is Patrick Miller.
Yes, Dr. Miller, go ahead.
I would just like to ask if the survey questions are analyzed separately for elementary and secondary schools when determining the relationship to student achievement.
They are not analyzed separately. I do have the power to request separate analysis. I am happy if it is the pleasure of the board. I can work with Dr. Townsend Smith to have those analysis done in the 3rd year of our contract with Cole.
Thank you.
That's a very good point that you've raised, Dr. Miller, and I believe that I'm sitting here listening to this study, looking at the many frames of rich data, and I'm saying to myself, we've got to do something else with this other than have a report every 2 years. And we talk about data informed, so here it is. So I would love to see some initiative around school districts that are doing exciting things with the data. I know that it must be informing their school improvement plans, and if not, that would be just a loss of waste of data. But I want us to think as a board creatively about where do we go next with this report, because it's just too rich to be static. And to that point, I'll ask for other questions before we bring this to closure.
Dr. Oxendine, it's Mr.
Yes,
Ford.
Mr. Ford.
Really brief question. Again, great data set, rich, informative. I'm happy that North Carolina has reached. One question that I do have is, and if it's already been, have we analyzed these data by the demographics of the actual teachers? That is to say, and I'll give you an example briefly as to why I think it's important. As we endeavor to increase the recruitment and retention of teachers of color, it may be useful to look at how teachers of color are responding to these questions and how it might differ across lines of race, ethnicity, etc., or gender, because there are often things within the school environment that make it hostile or not welcoming that may not show up unless we disaggregate. So is that sort of level of analysis available?
That level of analysis, it is not available. We don't ask teachers to identify I'm looking at the survey right now. We don't ask teachers to identify their race when they do demographics. So, and we also work really hard to not have any type of identifiers with the data. The anonymity of the survey is a question that we answer it over and over and over again. And so we try to make it so teachers feel confident in sharing what they feel their working conditions are. So that analysis would be difficult. We don't ask that demographic question. We can segment the data based on regions of the state. There are many different ways that we can slice the data to see where or if certain issues affect the state in different ways. And so I'm happy to work with the board on fulfilling any of those requests.
Yes, and if I may, I think that, as to your question, Dr. Oxendine, how do we go forward? I think that information is going to be crucially important. It just is in order for us to ensure. I could think about the discrepancies behind even teachers who might indicate that race is not a factor in bullying, and I saw that you broke that out there. And is there a correlation between how they identify? But as we try to create an environment, to me, that demographic information is going to be crucial, and we should do so in a way that protects the anonymity of the teachers for sure. But I would like for us to entertain that as a possibility going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And other comments or questions before I request permission from Chair Davis to go a step further with this.
Dr. Oxendine, this is Amy White. I do have one particular question.
Yes, Ms. White, and then I have a note beside me saying that Mariah would like to raise a question. So let me pay attention to my text messages.
Sure.
Ms. White.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Martin, specifically because you broached the subject of leadership and the key role that leadership plays in school climate. Is there a way that if we're asking for additional responses, is there a question on the survey that asks how long the principal leader has been in place in the school? And the second part of that is there any way to capture whether the principal has been serving less than 5 years? Every school can't have a Tabari Wallace, but we do know that leadership plays a key role in how instruction is delivered, how safety is delivered. I'll just leave you with that. Is there a way that we could capture that data? It may impact how we are preparing our principals to lead in the future. Thank you.
Yes, there is a question that I could point to for the principals that I could point to, and I'm happy to work with my vendor to do analysis for that. I also want to say how the principals survey has, in my opinion, this is Cynthia speaking, has been underutilized. I have some ideas, if it is at all possible, to do a few different analyses with that data set.
Oh, thank you, Cynthia. That's great to hear. All right, let me go to my text and get my lineup of those who want to comment. Mariah?
Hi, this is Mariah. I'm sorry. I think that was Matt who had it in the question box that he wanted to comment.
Matt?
Hey, Dr. Oxendine. Thanks, Mariah.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Go right ahead.
Dr. Oxendine, I have 3 questions. I will be brief. The first is I'm always interested in the multiple lenses and multiple perspectives that stakeholders at a school have, especially schools that have so many diverse stakeholders. And so I'm wondering if there are key questions that appear in the teacher survey that also appear in the principal survey, and if it's possible to tease out how those common questions might yield perception gaps between how teachers see issues versus principals. I mean, that to me is a really essential data set that I would love to have as a principal. If I'm seeing key issues at my school differently than my teachers are, then I really want to tease that out so that I can have open, transparent conversations about that. Secondly, also interested in knowing whether or not we have made any movement, or there might be movement in the future, in bringing in a comprehensive student working conditions or student learning conditions survey so that we could do the very same thing, so that we could tease out perception gaps between students, teachers, and also administration, because it takes everyone for a school culture to be healthy. These are all critical questions. Students have to be key primary data sets for us as we build our schools, especially if we design around them. And I continue to really love the idea of our school, our North Carolina Public Schools, lifting off a student learning conditions survey so that we can have that rich data set. And then the third question that I wanted to kind of pose is, has there been any potential discussion about creating a more robust platform for reporting this data sets so that districts could actually go in and mine which particular data sets are most important to them? And so we could actually break it down by grade levels, elementary, middle, and high school. We could break it out by demographics of respondents if we decided to go that way, so we could tease out some of the information that Mr. Ford was looking at. I'm 100% in agreement with you, Dr. Oxendine, that a static report doesn't allow the data to be as useful to us as it might otherwise be. So I would just love for there to be some discussion about maybe an interactive platform that we could actually get in and work with.
Thank you very much. I'm taking notes very frantically. And I think we have another, is Beverly would like to speak. I have a note.
Yes, thank you, Chair Oxendine. I wanted to applaud the comments here and just say that we all need to work together on how we find ways to fund many of the ideas, robust platforms, and abilities to better utilize the data because we are operating off a budget, and not to be the voice of practicality, but there are many ways we could expand and improve this given the resources. And I just also want to say this work this year started out challenging because we moved to a new partner after years of a long-term partnership. So that presented challenges that had to be overcome. Adding sections and how to do that from a research perspective that gathered data, but were not biased in any way because we did not have these questions in years past, presented another set of challenges, and then COVID messed with our timeline. So my comments here are just to praise Dr. Martin, an incredible tenacity in making this work and advocating for it while others of us got distracted, in engaging the folks within the agency from our communications team who did a beautiful job helping us promote this, our state superintendent, our state board chair, and support of others to make this happen. So I just wanted to lift up this hard work that has been even more challenging than a typical teacher working conditions year.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Emery, this is Mark Johnson.
Superintendent Johnson, you may go. You may.
Just wanted to really quick add to a thank you to Dr. Emery and her team, Dr. Martin. Obviously, this is an extremely challenging year, and a lot of the brainstorming that we had done to reach a very high percentage of completion for the teacher working condition survey was not able to be implemented because we were very focused on COVID-19, and also it just would not have been appropriate to push this out given all the work that we were asking our teachers to do to switch to remote learning. But in addition to the thanks to our partners and thanks to DPI, a big thanks to the 85% of educators who took the time to do this year. It is a true testament to how valuable this is, that we were on track in the early part of this survey to knock it out of the park. And before COVID-19, we already had over half of all the educators in the state had already completed it. And we still had probably 20% of educators, after all the COVID-19 crisis started, still take the time to go complete this survey. So a true testament to the leadership at DPI. And I just wanted to also echo thanks for the work on this.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. If there are no other comments or questions or ideas to put forward, I will close out by making a request of Chair Davis, if you would permit me to work alongside any other state board member who would like to join me with Dr. Martin and of course Deanna and our advisors to pull together a little think tank and figure out where to go next with this data, because it is too valuable to hear every 2 years and send out our accolades and go on to the next item on the agenda. And I'm already hearing from Dr. Martin. She says that she's more than willing to work with the vendors. I'm already concluding that she has a smart analytical mind and loves data. As a matter of fact, she's encouraged me to go find one of my old stat books and brush up. So I think she's the right person among many to help us move forward with something else rich to do with this data. So I would ask permission from Chair Davis if I might move forward with that idea.
Dr. Oxendine, I think that's a fabulous idea. I think not only this discussion that we just had, but also the way that this feedback we're getting from our teachers so closely aligns with our objectives and our strategic plan makes me think that collaboration with Mr. Ford and Ms. Kamnitz on this would be really valuable, not to exclude any other board members that want to participate, but that's a valuable connection. And also another idea that I just offer that I have heard is to perhaps get feedback from superintendents and principals on how to make this survey a more effective tool for them to use in determining the climate that our students are learning in and how to best support our teachers in delivering education to our students. So I appreciate your leadership on this, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you very much. There's so much good things ahead that can, on the horizon that can come out of going the next step with this. I consider it, as far as a report coming to the State Board of Education from the department, data provided from the field, I consider the piece of seminal work that we can be very, very proud of. So I will be working alongside. We'll set up a time and send out some emails and work closely with Dr. Townsend Smith. And please, board members, anyone join the effort. To the advisors, join the effort, and we will come out of this with the next steps. Thank you. The last item on the agenda actually is a consent item, and this, let's see, where are we? This is an item that was brought to us it was brought to us on the 21st of May, and it pertains to changes in the benefits manual. Dr. Tomberlin presented this item to us, and these changes were influenced by COVID-19 and all the state laws and statutes around that informed the State Board of Education to take a look at policies pertaining to benefits. So this is a consent item that I'm bringing to you today. And with that said, that ends my report, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Let's take a break until 1 o'clock and reconvene then. So we're on break until 1 p.m. Thank you.